Serious, what's your story of seeing somebody's mental state degrade? Watched my dad join a cult, get diagnosed with cancer, get dumped by the cult and die alone. It was horrible. One of his friends used the word sick as in ill, and that really made so many of his choices clear. He was dying. He felt like crap. He didn't want to get medical care. He became mentally unstable and ended up pushing everyone away over 9 years. He got his wish. He died alone. This is so sad. My mom has a brain tumor since I was barely able to make my own memories. It's so deep in the brain that it can't be removed. I witnessed firsthand the devastation of what failed surgeries can do. Although the tumor is benign, it presses her brain and it creates a liquid that affects other areas, causing epilepsy and other side effects. She's basically a toddler now that although she can sometimes remember me, she can't take care of herself at all. She degraded over the years, but I don't have memories of a healthy and capable mother. My early memories involve visiting her in the hospital. This is perhaps the saddest one, not only because you never got the chance to meet your real mum, but she also never got a chance to raise her child. I watched a friend get overtaken by his first bipolar episode in about 3 weeks. He started smoking a lot more weed than he had before. He was on Snapchat and social media non-stop. He started drinking heavily as well, and barely sleeping. He totaled his Jeep and got a DUI. He went to his job and told his boss to frick off, among other things. He was fired. He started getting angry very easily. During this time I spoke to his mom to let her know what was going on, but she was in denial still. The drinking and mania continued for another week. He went golfing with some friends, and as they were driving home, he lost it and started ripping his clothes off and tried to jump out of the car. They pulled over and he was screaming for someone to come and kill him. They calmed him down enough to get to the hospital, where he stayed for a few days. This all happened in 3 weeks. He's better now, which is really good to see. So I am a nurse in an assisted living facility. Most people there have dementia. Of course I have plenty of stories of sundowners or hospice patients. However, this person just stuck with me when I was an aide at a local hospital. There was a woman who came into a med-surg unit. She was middle-aged, so not old. I don't remember why she was on our unit, but I remember it had something to do with a car accident. But she was so smart. She had 2 doctorate degrees and enriched men who lives at a local college. I just remember being in awe of the conversations I would have with her when I had the time. She was there for a long time. I remember saying goodbye to her at the end of the shift and her commenting that she was going to a rehab facility. A few months go by and she came back. I remember seeing her name and being excited to see her. When I went to her room, she didn't recognize me, which wasn't too odd. Sometimes our regulars didn't recognize me. However, she didn't even know how to use the remote for the TV. She could still for the most part take care of herself with minimal help, but something was off. I told the nurse who had taken care of her the previous night about the status condition change, but the nurse didn't do anything. The next times I had her, I just watched her decline, become incontinent, unable to care for herself, mood swings, all of those. It was the saddest thing I had ever seen at that point in my career. She ended up passing in the hospital. I will never forget the intelligent, strong woman I had met just months ago become almost a shell and non-verbal so quickly. I never saw a visitor there even once. My mother had cancer, and at the very end, maybe the last 2 weeks, there was a very rapid deterioration of her mental state. At first she'd say something a little off, like she had a couple of seizures, and I think she heard something about a Mediterranean cruise on TV, so she suddenly said, "I have the Mediterranean shakes. It goes like this," and she kinda moved her arms in a shimmy. After a few seconds she went, "Jesus, I'm losing my marbles," and we all, me, her, my sister, and my father, had kind of a sad laugh together. Little things like that went on for like a week. Then she started talking to people and commenting on things that weren't there, but she knew her mind was playing tricks on her. I remember my uncle, her brother, came up from Florida to say goodbye, and it took her a few minutes to realize she wasn't imagining him. She died a few of days later. Those were 2 very hard weeks for 15-year-old me, especially because on her 49th birthday just 5 weeks prior she seemed perfectly healthy. I of course knew she had cancer, but it seemed like she would pull through. Man, I haven't thought about that in a while. That was hard to write. My mom is a schizophrenic. I haven't seen her in about 8 years at this point. She was in and out of my life a lot. As my dad would take her back, she'd start up on meds, stop taking them again, and everything would start over. She went from a normal almost soccer mom in my youth to a BPD schizophrenic mess by the time I was 16. This leave return process had a lot of side effects, horrible situations, police callings etc. But one situation stood out to me the most as the scariest thing she'd ever said to me. The last lucid thought she had. She always kept the pepper by the coffee pot, because if you put pepper flakes into coffee and something has been added to it, because she was worried about being poisoned, the pepper flakes disperse over the surface of the coffee very quickly. She demonstrated with dish soaps and oils, and even antifreeze a few times. At one point, I legitimately forgot why she kept the pepper by the coffee pot, across from the stove, instead of above the stove with the rest of the spices. So, I asked her. She responded with, "So that every time you grab the pepper from now on, you'll think about how I was before my mind went to crap." Immediately I asked what she meant, and her brain shut off and she acted like she'd never said it. She vanished a few weeks later around Christmas 2013. I think she's living in Florida now. Still has a conspiracy theory Twitter and everything. Sending you internet hugs. I'm sorry. Grandma. She had Alzheimer and dementia. She started losing her memory slowly over time. Then one day she fell and broke her hip. Being bedridden accelerated her illnesses, and within a couple of months she was just laying there and staring at the roof, barely speaking, and all she says is nonsense. She doesn't recognize anyone, not even her children. It's like she's not there anymore and all that's left is her body. The sad part is that she's been like that for years. Dead but not really dead. That we can't even mourn her, probably because all the sadness and tears were shed while her body still lies on her bed. A close person to me told that he had what he thought was a mental breakdown at the age of 5 or so, and the reason was intrusive thoughts about death, specifically his own death. I said, why would you even be thinking that at that age, and why would he worry about that because he was still a child and far from death? He just responded with, I don't know. It's like I know how it feels. It might have been just a one-time thing, but he had these mental breakdowns sometimes and it was not good. The most recent bad one was when he was 15. He was doing something happy or anything, but then he suddenly freezes up, then flinches and starts to cry like a child. And he cries for hours and kicks his feet. At this point I was scared because he was inconsolable and don't know what to do. After a night's sleep, he seems to be fine, but he seems to have momentary aftershocks and would flinch and start to cry again. He said it takes 2 months to recover from this or be back to his normal happy self, but he becomes scared, frantic and sad in these 2 months. Worst thing is, I think he kinda had PTSD from these episodes, and if something reminds him of these situations he breaks down again. One specific song was enough to make him have a mental breakdown, and it seems he is likely to have these in December or in the night. He's fine now and has ways to recover from the breakdowns, but it seems he is still prone to having these episodes. My cousin has schizophrenia. When I was a kid I remember him being completely normal. Then he joined the Navy and apparently got bullied a frick ton. When he came back he was 100% different. He would just stare into nothingness. He didn't say anything. Sometimes he'd laugh, but he wouldn't smile while doing it, and it'd be so dry and robotic. He totally broke down. My fiance's mom passed a few years ago from Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, CJD for short. CJD is most commonly called mad cow disease, even though they aren't the same. CJD only happens to humans and mad cow is bovine. CJD is when these proteins in your brain called prions go crazy and starts to fold and basically turns your brain into Swiss cheese. There is no cure and it is very rare. Only a few hundred cases a year. She was perfectly healthy except for being diabetic, but she had 0 complications with her diabetes. Then out of nowhere she started having problems remembering things and then starting having mood swings. She went to the doctor but they couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't until a month or so later that a specialist diagnosed her with CJD. She went from being completely healthy to not being able to move her arms, legs, control voluntary and involuntary functions, and then death in 8 months. It was extremely hard on my fiance to see her mom lose everything that made her who she was. Her own mother and father had to see her deteriorate as well. I was just awful for the whole family. My grandfather died of CJD as well. I was away at college, so I didn't see his decline. But even when I had been home for Christmas we could tell something wasn't right. His funeral was the week of my spring midterms, and I couldn't get home until the following week. I know how hard it was on my dad to see his father that way. My grandmother was very ill for many years with almost no immune system. Minor cuts and scrapes would get infected and run rampant. Every now and then the infection would make its way to her brain. It would usually start slowly and progress to hallucinations. Commonly she would see mice or cockroaches. One time she believed fully that she had hair lice and would get her husband to check and comb her hair to the point it would start falling out. Eventually she'd have no idea of the date or even the year, sometimes believing it was as early as the 40s, the same year she was born. She'd then begin to forget how old people were and at its worse, who they were. All this time she believed she was fine and refused to go to the hospital. Even after all that, the hardest was the vitriolic hateful things she would say to you and everyone else when the ambulances were called because she could barely stay conscious. These infections happened 4 or 5 times, maybe more, and every time the doctors would tell us that she wouldn't make it, and she did every time. She passed away in 2017. When we came back from my deployment, I literally watched my then husband become a shell of the person he previously was. Prior to the deployment he was so light, optimistic, and social. He slowly transitioned into a man afraid to leave home and eventually began to use substances and was finally released from duty because of it. We still remain friends after all these years, but he's still only a ghost of the person he was before. I am so sorry. This is awful to experience. At some point you have to accept that the person you loved is never mentally coming back. It's truly heart-wrenching. When I was in graduate school for psychology, my aunt and uncle called me over to their house because my cousin refused to get out of bed or go to work. When I got there I witnessed my cousin in his bed laughing at random statements he made, smiling in a bizarre way, and looking at me and saying lewd comments about sexual behavior and what he wanted to do with me. This was completely out of character. I told my aunt and uncle something was clearly not right, and I suggested we take him to a behavioral health center. They balked at the idea, insisting my cousin was just trying to get out of going to work. Meanwhile, my cousin gets out of bed and became agitated, shouting random sexual comments and saying he was going to beat everybody up. We called the paramedics, and they had to restrain him and then took him to the behavioral health center. My cousin was placed in a locked holding area, and he kicked the walls, jumped around, and yelled. It was hard to watch. The intern psychiatrist asked me several questions pertaining to my cousin's genes. My cousin was adopted and we didn't have any valid information. Anyway, his diagnosis ended up being schizoaffective disorder. He's never been the same. My group of friends witnessed 2 friends go through paranoid schizophrenic breakdowns, one after the other, in the space of 2 years. The second one was my roommate. It happened very suddenly. He just woke up one day and decided that we were all lying to him all the time, and acted with the hostility and contempt that you would expect from someone who thought those things. He did erratic stuff like smashing all his belongings with a baseball bat in the driveway and piling all his socks on the kitchen floor. He eventually went back to his parents' house, which was a relief. From what I have heard, he never really got the help he needed. Friend fell back into addiction. I thought I felt powerless as I listened to him downplay his use. I felt even more useless as he started looking off into corners. Then said the voices that he was hearing weren't from him. They were from living with his parents. While I was away, my BF went over to him holding a kitchen knife to keep his parents, who were half a world away on vacation, in the basement. He hid in a bench for 6 hours. Finally, he called the cops on his voices. Visited him every day I could in the mental ward. When he got out, he blew up our friendship, went missing, went back into the psych ward. That's the last thing I knew. 2 people who were close to me are addicted to M. Just don't do M. It's never going to turn out alright. The emotional turmoil you and your loved ones go through is not worth any drug. Made a friend who was a super cool guy and everyone always wanted to spend time with him and he was always included. There were so many little things here and there that tipped us off, though, that progressed from apologizing a lot for everything to being all robotic and lacking any sort of personality, to stalking, to violent mental breakdowns, to death threats and eventually a suicide attempt. My mom is manic depressed. Most of my childhood she had it under control with the help of strong drugs. After my little sister was born, she gained a lot of weight and she had the idea to stop her medication in order to lose weight. After that, everything went downhill. She soon developed manic phases. Every day her mood changed. 1 day, depressed, constantly crying. 2 day, super happy and euphoric, would spend most of the money we had for the week. 3 day, regretful of her spendings and blaming it on us kids. 4 day, provoking towards us, begging us to hit her or break things, extremely aggressive, but would never hit us. Repeat. This went on for 2 years. My little sister was 4, I was 10 and my big sister was 12. We wouldn't have enough money for the month by the end of the first week. She would often cook everything from our pantry in the matter of 1 day, and the food would go to waste. She wouldn't bring my sister to daycare. I walked her to daycare, went to school and picked her up at the end of the day. That year, I learned how to cook and I would steal money from her to go grocery shopping. It was the worst time of my life. You have to understand, before that, I never saw my mom being maniac. It was like someone killed my sweet, loving, caring mom and replaced her with a stranger. I cried every night. She finally started taking her drugs when my sister confessed to her that she was molested by our best friend's father. That year, we had spent a lot of our time with this family, so she blamed it on herself for not realizing sooner. 11 years later, and I'm so proud of my mom. She has her mental illness under control, takes amazing care of my little sister and has raised us to be strong, independent women. There's a tiny part of me that still doesn't trust my mom in her life choices or decision making, but I love her to death. My half brother started out life pretty well, spoiled absolutely rotten and got anything he wanted. My mother had me when he was 16 and she's always said that was what started his downhill spiral, because he suddenly wasn't spoiled and the center of attention anymore. He barely graduated high school because he had played sports and was planning on going pro in baseball, but of course it never happened. My parents used their savings to send him to college and he majored in tech, where he failed out of his classes because he said the Asian kids were better and embarrassed him. They bought him a car. He wrecked it. They bought him another car. He wrecked it. They bought him a third car. He let it rust out. With no real other prospects he joined the military, went to Iraq. He killed quite a few civilians, bragged about it a lot, sent me photos of the corpses. When he came back my mother begged him not to re-enlist so he didn't, but he wanted to go back so bad because he didn't know what else to do. He knocked his girlfriend up, had my niece, became a cop to use his military skills. Our grandmother bought him a house. The house is now condemned because no one would clean and it's covered in cat poop, dog poop, rat poop, cockroaches etc. Imagine a house from hoarders and multiply that, and add a couple in their 30s with 2 young children. He got fired from the police force for misconduct, and now lives in his friend's apartment helping him grow weed in the bathroom. His wife left him, and he has custody of my niece who lives without internet, running water, a consistent food supply and a bathroom. He looks like a homeless man, and we can't even reach him because his phone was shut off. Not something I would want to describe in great detail, but got to witness what delayed onset PTSD can do to someone. I was aware that someone very important to me had gone through some crap in adolescence, but they seemed incredibly okay with it when we met and grew close. However, another related event occurred that revealed that their okayness was a pretty thin crust over a freaking volcano of crap. This person went from happy-go-lucky, bubbly, generally quite charmingly extroverted and largely functioning, to an absolute emotional wreck in the space of a few weeks, if that. Had to watch someone's psyche get gutted from the inside by something that happened nearly a decade ago, and had no idea how to even begin to help. The whole thing was incredibly grueling to witness, and I don't think I can even come close to imagining how it must have been to experience it. Over the course of the next 4 or 5 years though I watched this same person basically rebuild themselves from the ground up, despite what seemed like constant relapses after even the tiniest progress. Can't overstate how much respect I have for them, and for the therapists that eventually help them through it. My brother was always a little bit off. Most of the times, it was perceived as an effect of a serious medical condition he had as a child. He was intelligent, bright as heck, exceeding in academics field, so most of his weird mannerisms was written off. You know, beautiful mind weird nerd kind of stuff. But there was something else that he kept hidden from his mother and our father. He was experimenting with anything psychoactive he could find, combining it with regular stoner stuff, lucid dreaming, meditating. He slowly disappeared from social life and became weirder and weirder to talk to. When we talked for the last time, he went on about being one with his astral plane and about how we should both escape to China, where chips implanted in our bodies will have no signal. He was taken to a mental institution about a week after that, diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and released on his first leave after 3 months. As I was in our hometown at the time, I planned to visit him after he was released. We were set to meet on Saturday, but he died on Friday evening. I want to believe that in his last moments he aimed to finally become one with the astral world he created in his mind, and not a broken young man who came to realization that for his whole life he will have to fight with a severe illness. Took me about 2 years to finally make peace with what happened, but I guess I'll never forgive the medical professionals who had let him out for the leave. I'm so sorry for your loss. My grandfather had PTSD from Vietnam. In his final days, he was in a mental institution. They let him out and told us good luck. He took his life that night. I know how crappy that feeling is. I hope the best for you and your family. It's happening right now and it's not fun to watch. My cell rang at 3 AM last night. It's my mother calling, asking if the tomato plants in the backyard have fruit. As I am typing this, my phone is ringing and it's her. She is in the adjacent room and partially within my line of sight. People forget that Parkinson's just doesn't make you shake. It's muscle rigidity, muscle mass loss coupled with cognitive decline. Honestly, I don't know how people like Michael J. Fox manage to continually survive. It ain't money related, because there is no magical drug cocktail that prevents it from getting worse. A friend of mine ended up in an abusive friendship and never recovered. Said friendship lasted over 6 years. No one could convince him that the other person was terrible to him. He ended up ghosting a lot of people he knew, including me. Last I saw of him, his self-esteem had basically tanked into the negatives. He was second-guessing almost every decision he had to make and was much more reserved. I heard through a mutual friend that he ended up moving away and going to therapy in the end, so I hope he got the help he needed. Maybe he lost faith in people, knowing his previous friendship was a lie. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.